step out of the way while we begin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.
Welcome, everybody. Good morning. Thank you for coming here today to this Latino Leadership Conference. So important that we talk about these issues today. And we're going to start with the first panel. And I'm very glad to be here. My name is Silvana Quiroz. I'm the host, the anchor, and the producer of the morning show at Univision, Washington. Buenos dias, they say. I'm awake since 2 a.m. So, and every morning we try to talk about the things you're going to be listening this morning. And they told me, Silvana, you have to be the moderator for the first panel. I said, wonderful. And it's going to be in English. And I'm like, okay. My English is not very good looking, but I'm going to do my best, okay? And we're going to talk about the Latinos. And I know many of you have come to this country 10 years ago, 2 years ago. Many of the panelists here are like fourth, third generation of Latinos. And that's what we're going to talk about. Who is Latino and what is the Latino identity this morning? And we have a wonderful panel. And I'm sure, and I want to tell you that you should wait until they do their presentations so you can ask the questions. I'm sure you're going to have a lot of questions because this panel is going to be great. So we're going to start with Nashir Kasham, who is the data dissemination specialist from the U.S. Census Bureau. So she has all the numbers, she has all the information we need to know about what communities are growing here in the United States. So let's give her an applause, right? Let's do that since you're here. And we also have Dr. Mark Hugo Lopez, a very good friend who always comes to the show and talks about these interesting studies that they are doing at the Hispanics Research Pew. And he's the director of the Hispanic Research Pew. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
We also have un colega, my colleague, Mr. Hugo Balta, who is the president of the National Association of Hispanics Journalists. And he's here he comes from a very big background. He works at ESPN.
ESPN.
Right? That's right. Let's give him an applause. And we also have Ronald Woodman. Is that all right? Did I say it right?
Pretty close.
Pretty close, right? So he is the director of, he is the public programs director of the Smithsonian Latino Center. So he was telling me about this really wonderful presentations and expositions they have in the Smithsonian that are really wonderful for the community, and you should pay attention to what he's going to talk about. So let's give him an applause. So let's start with our first panelist.
Thank you.
Nashir Kasham.
Good morning, everyone. Once again, I'm Nesreen Kashan with the U.S. Census Bureau, and I'm hoping this will fire up shortly. There we go. So thank you for having me here to talk about Hispanics and the impression that they've made on multicultural Montgomery County. The United States, of course, is a country of immigrants. And as one myself, delving into the aspects of the United States immigrant and ethnic communities is, for me, the most fascinating aspect of U.S. Census Bureau data. Due to how these data are collected, it happens to be that the most robust data we have are for Hispanics and also Asian communities. It's through these data sets that we can understand the impact and the scale that these communities have on our nation and really in our own communities as the demographics change throughout the 21st century. So I'm going to begin actually with a national look at data featuring Hispanics. So as of April 1st, 2010, 50.5 million Hispanics, comprising 16.3% of the population, were counted in the United States. April 1st, 2010 was Census Day. And our total population on April 1st, 2010 was 308 308.7 million. Between the years of 2000 and 2010, Hispanics accounted for over one half, that's 55.5% of the nation's growth. Also between 2000 and 2010, the Hispanic growth rate was 43%. That's 4 times the growth rate of the total population of that period of 9.7%. So that's fairly astonishing. And just to get you up to speed, since the 2010 census was conducted, our most recent data through our population estimates program at the U.S. Census Bureau show that the Hispanic population has since grown to 53 million, comprising 16.9% of the population, of the nation's population. So what you see here is it's a screenshot from an interactive graphic available on census.gov. And once again, this is a snapshot of April 1st, 2010. And what it shows is the distribution of Hispanic or Latino population by specific country of origin. And here I'm featuring Salvadorans, primarily because they are, as you could see, the largest group in Maryland, and definitely by far the largest group in Montgomery County, which you'll see more details about a couple slides from now. So what we have here are, this is showing Hispanic growth from 1970 and then afterward projections nationally. So again, we're looking nationally. And you could see how the growth as a percentage of the population has steadily climbed up. By 2020, the Hispanic population is expected to jump to 19.4% of the total U.S. population, and it's projected to grow at roughly the same rate through 2040. And by 2050, the Hispanic population is projected to comprise 30.2% of the nation's population. So now we're moving local, which is where we'll remain for the portion of my presentation. So here's what's happening in Montgomery County in terms of census counts and current estimates of Hispanic growth since 1980. So here you can see that between 1980 and 1990, the Hispanic population doubled, and it nearly doubled again between 1990 and 2000. So between 2000 and 2010, the growth wasn't as dramatic, but it was still significant at 65,000 plus Hispanics added in the county. And then once again, through the population estimates program, getting us to the most current data that are available, you see that the county has added an additional 15,000 Hispanics estimated since the 2000 census was conducted. So this is the same data roughly, but just as a percentage of total population. And once again, you can see the clear trajectory in terms of growth in Hispanic population, even into the 2012 population estimates, shifting from 17.5 to an estimated 17.9. So what you're looking at here are Hispanic distribution by census tracts. And what census tracts are essentially your neighborhood level data. And what's going on here is you see the concentration of Hispanics in Montgomery County, Down County, Langley Park, which is also part of Prince George's County, definitely Wheaton, definitely Silver Spring. And then if you follow that up around the 270 corridor, you see you also see the darker green showing the more significant populations of Hispanics in Montgomery County. So this is a follow-up to that slide, and this is essentially Hispanics by select place. And what we mean at the Census Bureau by place is either your incorporated place like cities like Gaithersburg or Rockville, or unincorporated places like Bethesda or Silver Spring. And what you see here clearly is that Wheaton has the highest concentration of Hispanics. And this is just as a reminder, this is April 1st, 2010, a snapshot of Census Day. And Wheaton is followed up by Silver Spring, and then you see the higher concentrations along that 270 corridor I mentioned, Germantown and Gaithersburg and so on, but also significant populations in Aspen Hill. So this is particularly interesting to me because this is Hispanics. Now we're moving to a different data set. This is a 2012 American Community Survey, and this is showing the Hispanics in Montgomery County by country of origin. And you've got 68,000 plus of Hispanics of Salvadoran descent in your county, followed by the next highest group, which is significantly lower, Mexicans at almost 18,000. So this gives you a sense that clearly the county is experiencing significant growth and continues to do so of Salvadoran populations. But also there are notably higher numbers besides Mexicans of Guatemalan and Honduran and Peruvian. So just to switch this up a bit, I'm changing data sets here. This is a 2006 to 2010 5-year estimate, just so you know what you're looking at. But I wanted to look at educational attainment for those same Hispanics by country of origin. And what you're looking at is essentially you have a very high education rates among certain Hispanics in the community. You've got 49.3% for Puerto Ricans, 30.6% for Mexican, almost 50% for Cuban, and as you could see on the Bolivian to Peruvian spectrum, again, really high rates of education, or fairly high. This is a percentage earning a bachelor degree or higher, age 25 or over. But then let's take a look at Salvadoran, which is at 5.6%, and Honduran and Guatemalan. So while you have a significantly higher education rates, in the middle you have also considerably lower education rates among what are clearly the most recent immigrants to the community. So here we're looking at Montgomery County educational attainment by race and ethnic origin. So here you have Hispanics at 25.6%. They're flagging behind both the whites, blacks, and Asians. And we can surmise from the earlier slides it's because of those lower rates among the newer groups is pulling that down, despite the fact that many Hispanics in the community do have higher rates of education. And here we're looking at Montgomery County poverty rates by race and Hispanic origin. And Hispanics and blacks or African Americans have roughly the same country of origin, but the Hispanics are very behind Asians and whites. And here we have median income by race and Hispanic origin. And once again, the Hispanics are behind in estimates for median income, blacks, but not as significantly as they are behind the Asian and white populations. And we know that often a barrier to higher education rates and higher incomes is proficiency in English. So this lets us look at by race and Hispanic origin who speaks English less than very well. And as you can see, 80% of the county's Hispanic population speaks a language other than English. And of that 80%, 36.8 have limited English proficiency. So that gives those two prior slides a bit more context. And in this last slide of my presentation today, I just want to point out that Hispanics in Montgomery County and really in Maryland are significantly younger than the population at large. And this slide really sets up the reason why. You see that the Hispanics are considerably ahead of all the major race groups in family households with children under 18, and they are also have significantly lower percentages of non-family households. So that concludes my portion of the presentation, and please feel free to get in touch with me if you'd like more information about today's presentation.
Perfect. That was great, wasn't it? I have so many questions myself, but we're going to have to wait until all the panelists are done with their presentations. But let's go with Dr. Mark Hugo Lopez.
Great.
From the Research Pew Center.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here today. While I'm seeing if my presentation pops up here, I'm going to talk to you today about some of the work that we have done at the center, looking at how Latinos nationwide see their identity. Now, as Nazreen was talking about, of course, there's a lot of diversity in the Latino community. There's diversity in the community within Montgomery County alone. In fact, I think it's important to note that the Washington, D.C. area is really diverse when it comes to the various origins that Latinos are from. For example, you go to South Florida, it's largely dominated by Cubans. If you go to, for example, Los Angeles or South Texas, it's largely dominated by Mexicans. But what's interesting about Washington is that while the largest group are Salvadorans, they aren't the majority of the Hispanic population here. Instead, you have large communities of Bolivians and Peruvians, and you have Ecuadorians, and you also have Mexican, Cuban, and Puerto Rican. But perhaps surprisingly about Washington is that unlike other parts in the country, Mexicans, Cubans, and Puerto Ricans are not the largest group here. Everywhere else, it's one of those three pretty much, or Dominicans as well, I should say. But here, D.C. is very unique. But I want to give you a sense of what we have found nationally in terms of our numbers. Now, this is data based off of Census Bureau data as well, and this is the distribution and the population sizes of the nation's largest Hispanic groups with at least 1 million people. So you can see that, for example, there are 33.5 million Hispanics who say that their roots are Mexican. That's me. I was one of your 17,000 there, which I'm like, it's weird to be, you know, in LA, everybody's Mexican, it seems, right? And so I don't feel out of place in LA. But here, I'm not in the majority. I just don't want to say that. Puerto Ricans at 4.9 million. Now, this is just the population of the Puerto Rican origin population in the United States in the District of Columbia. That does not include the island, the population on the island, which is at about 3.7 million. So that just gives you some sense that there are more people of Puerto Rican origin in the 50 states plus D.C. than on the island. And the island's actually been experiencing in recent years a decline in its population. So some interesting things happening in the Puerto Rican population. Then next is Salvadoran and Cuban. And I always find this story really fascinating. After about 50 years, where Cubans have been the third largest Hispanic origin group in the country, it looks like they're on the verge of becoming the fourth largest, and Salvadoran surpassing them to become the third. Now, we don't know for sure yet because the statistics don't allow us to make that claim just yet, but at least in 2011, and by the way, also in 2012, the size of the Salvadoran population nationally exceeded the Cuban population. Now, continuing here to kind of show you that story, here's how the two populations have jostled with each other over the course of the last 6-7 years. Now you can see that they've kind of been going back and forth. But the Salvadoran population is a younger population. It's also one with more families, and there's also a little bit more migration to the United States from El Salvador than you have coming from Cuba. So all of those are contributing to a slightly faster growth rate. And it's likely that Salvadorans will surpass Cubans sometime in the next 10 years or so, probably in the next 2 or 3 years. Now, as I was telling you, the composition of Latinos varies tremendously across the different cities in the metropolitan areas in the country. And you can see how unique Washington is here. You can see New York has a large Puerto Rican and Dominican population. In Miami, it's half of the population is of Cuban origin. But Miami is interesting in how many South Americans are coming to the Miami area, particularly Venezuelans and Colombians. And so it's really also very, very unique. Look at Los Angeles, which is where I'm from, and you can see that 78% of the Latinos in the Los Angeles area are of Mexican origin. Yeah. Now, we've been asking Hispanics questions about how they describe their identity, because identity with Hispanics is actually a multifaceted concept. There isn't one single identity. When you talk to Latinos in focus groups, we have found, for example, some prefer terms like Hispanic or Latino. Some prefer to use their country of origin name or the family's ancestry terms. Some say that, hey, I'm American. I may be of Mexican origin, but I am American. And so we've been asking questions, and this has been pretty stable over the years. What terms do you use most often to describe yourself? And you can see that for all Hispanics, half, 54%, say it's their country of origin term. I'm Mexican, I'm Salvadoran, I'm Cuban. Second is, the second most common answer is American, which is interesting because moving forward, most growth in the Hispanic population in the United States is going to come not from new immigrants arriving, but instead going to be coming from young Latinos born here. So in many respects, this is partly the future. That is, it's the future where many more Hispanics will be calling themselves American, perhaps even first. Now, these numbers vary across different country of origin groups. Salvadorans, 49% say that they use their Hispanic country of origin term in our surveys, 36% say Hispanic or Latino, and 12% say American. But you can see for all of these, the results look very, very similar. There's hardly any difference, really. I mean, it's 49 versus 66 is big, but essentially the largest single group of respondents are people who prefer their country of origin term. Now, we've also asked whether or not Hispanics feel like they're a typical American or not. In our survey question, we didn't define what a typical American is. We let people answer this based on what they think a typical American is. And here's what we found. You can see that Puerto Ricans, 57%, are the ones most likely to say that they see themselves as a typical American. Well, Puerto Ricans, whether born on the island or born here in the States, of course, are U.S. citizens by birth, so they're very much tied to the American experience. 55% of Cubans say that, 53% of Dominicans say that, all the way down to Salvadorans, 35% say they see themselves as a typical American, 51% say they see themselves as very different from a typical American. Now, continuing on to these shared values with whether or not Latinos here have shared values with those in their home countries, it's really interesting how different the responses are depending on the country of origin group. For example, look at Cubans. And we asked this question, how much do you think Cubans in the United States have shared values in common with people in Cuba? So, among Cubans, 36% say they have a lot in common with those in Cuba. 26% say some, but 36%, over a third, say they have very little or nothing at all with those in common with those on the island. And you can see that for Puerto Ricans, there's also somewhat of a mixed story. But look at Salvadorans. 56% of Salvadorans nationally say that they have a lot in common with people in El Salvador. That tells me that there's probably a lot of mixing and going back and forth between here and there, and also that there's a continued migration, a relatively recent migration of folks who are from El Salvador. Now, in terms of shared values among Hispanics, our surveys also show somewhat of a mixed story. But it's interesting to note that Salvadorans are the ones most likely to say that they have a lot in common with other Latinos in the United States in terms of shared values. Now, I want to close by talking a little bit about language, because we were talking about language earlier. And one of the interesting things here is how important English is, but also how important Spanish is. Latinos overwhelmingly say new immigrants to the U.S., they should be speaking English. That's 87% say yes. That's an important thing for them to learn. But 95% of Latinos nationally say it's important that future generations speak Spanish. So on the one hand, speak English, but on the other, maintain that root and connection to Spanish. Now, what's happening is that the number of Spanish speakers is rising, but so too is English proficiency in the Latino community. There are now 35 million Latinos who speak Spanish at home. But projections from the Census Bureau show that this language composition is changing. So while the number of Spanish speakers is growing, the percent of Latinos who live in a household where only English is spoken is on the rise. And by 2020, that number will be about 34%. So what's interesting here is that those native-born Latinos, that second and third generation Latino group, is really starting to impact the statistics that we see for the community. Finally, what are Latinos Spanish dominant, English dominant, or bilingual? You can see here that across different generations, of course, by the third generation, people born in the U.S. with U.S.-born parents, English becomes the dominant language. I'm going to stop there because I know that my time is almost up and there's so much more to talk about. But I'm going to stop there because it's a lot of fun to tell these stories. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mark. Wow. So we learned a lot about that presentation, right? We should learn to speak English. We should learn to speak Spanish, the ones who don't know. And for that, you can watch Buenos Días de Se every morning at 6. So we're going to go with our next panelist, who is mi colega, Mr. Hugo Balta, Presidente de National Association of Hispanic Journalists.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. As Silvana said, I'm the president of the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. I'm also a coordinating producer for ESPN, and in my career, I've been a member of the CBS, NBC News team, as well as Telemundo. What I'm going to talk to you today is about media and media's role in shaping this Latino identity. Media has a great impact on how we view ourselves and how others view ourselves. Now, looking at the audience, roughly, I see a lot of people who look like me, different age groups, and it's a little bit about preaching to the choir. What's important is to talk about these topics to people who don't look like us, so they have a better understanding of our community and how our community is shaping what it is to be an American. I think it's very interesting what we talked about today with the Pew study and, of course, the census and what it is to be an American. And the Latino community, the population boom is redefining what it is to be an American. Certainly, we're in the midst of a social revolution that's not just about country of origin, but it also includes language. Media will play a role in telling that story. So when we see the United States and we see the American flag, when we're talking about the Latino community, as we've discussed already with the census, it's made up of many different types of Latino communities within the country. When we self-identify ourselves, I don't self-identify as a Latino. Somebody meets me and says, well, nice to meet you, Hugo. Where are you from? I said, well, I'm from northern New Jersey. No. I mean, where are you from? Well, right now I work for ESPN, so I reside in central Connecticut. No, where are you from? Now, I know the question at the very beginning because they're already projecting who they think I am and where I'm from. Now, I self-identify as a Peruvian American. I'm a first-generation Latino. Both my parents are immigrants from Peru. I've lived in Peru. I've lived in the United States. I feel as proud of my Peruvian roots as I do of my American roots. But I don't self-identify as a Latino. I certainly celebrate that I'm part of a larger group of people that are Latinos, but I'm a Peruvian American from the Northeast. So the Latino image in the United States, beginning with media and entertainment. From the very beginning, the first image of a Latino was through entertainment. Of course, I Love Lucy, what a very popular show. Latino, Desi Arnaz, a very talented actor and entertainer. But as far as the English language audience and their introduction to Latinos, it was through comedy. It was when Ricky Ricardo, he had an accent, and when he got upset with Lucy, he not only lost it, but he lost it in Spanish. And it was like, brrr, and they often made fun of that. Then we have Speedy Gonzalez, which is a caricature of what a Mexican is, a caricature. And I had him put his buddy, who's another a mouse that's more lazy and whatnot, but again, a caricature of who a real person is. And of course, then we have Tony Montana, right? If a Latino is going to succeed in this country, it's going to be through crime. It's going to be through violence. And of course, we have Sofia Vergara, who's very beautiful, and she's now part of the mainstream America. But again, while that's a comedy, it's selling sex. So Latinos, we're hot-tempered, we're caricatures, we're criminals, and we're driving the population, right? So we're getting busy. So we're certainly sensual. Those stereotypes from entertainment translate into mass media, translates into news. And so what we have is when there's a crime, and this is an interesting thing that happened in the 90s. Before, when there was a crime, a person's ethnicity, or I should say immigration status, was never revealed. It was always, there was a crime, here's a description, this is the person. But somewhere along the lines, driven by political rhetoric, it was acceptable to say undocumented, or I should say they would say illegal immigrant, which is a wrong term, or not, to describe a Latino as if that would impact the crime itself. Of course, we have the sign where if you're a Latino, you're overpopulating the country, and there you have not only 3 but a dozen kids behind that. Illegal aliens hurting U.S. Workers. Now, this is interesting also because, as history has shown us, when a country suffers ills, you gravitate and you point the direction to the people who are most susceptible for that type of attack. And in the case of the recession and a lot of the unemployment woes and economic woes that this country has undergone, the blame, largely driven by a lot of conservative rhetoric, has been, if you don't have a job, well, let me tell you who's to blame. It's those illegal immigrants. Is your property value down? Is your mortgage higher than what your house is worth? Well, I'll tell you who's to blame. It's those illegal aliens. So much so that early last year, Bloomberg Business Newsweek had an article warning about another housing economic bubble, and in its front cover, it highlighted Latinos and African Americans bathing in money as if they're the ones that drove the first economic upheaval, when in fact, these are the people that were the victims of predatory lending by greedy mortgage companies. So, most recently, again, what it is to be an American. What is it to be a Latino? Last year at the NBA Finals, Sebastián de la Cruz was invited to sing the national anthem while the Spurs were in San Antonio, and social media went crazy. Many people attacked him and were questioning, why is this Mexican or this foreigner singing our national anthem? This kid happens to be a member of the San Antonio community. He is an American, but again, perceptions of what it is to be an American, but really who is an American, is how media needs to continue to help shape, because he is an American. So, he's dressed in mariachi garb because that's part of his heritage, which we all celebrate, but again, the masses attacked him. And then at the baseball All-Star game, Mark Anthony was also similarly attacked when he sang the God Bless America. Mark Anthony, you can't get more New York than Mark Anthony. He's a New York native. He's of Puerto Rican descent, and he was being accused again of being Mexican. But again, generalizing, the mass population generalizes who we are. But that's changing. And now that changed late in 2012 with the general election, where for so many years it had been discussed, well, the Latino population is growing. The 2000 census said, the Latinos are coming, the Latinos are coming. 2010 census said, they're here. In the election of 2012, for the first time, the Latinos, who already are driving the economy, flexed their political muscle and helped President Obama get back to the White House in key battleground states. 26% of Latinos, more Latinos voted in 2012 than they did in the previous election. So the sleeping giant woke up. Now, not only are we driving population, not only are we circling $2 trillion in driving the economy, but we're also being involved in deciding the leadership at the local and national level. Back to mass media and again, defining who Latinos are. Latinos are, we love football, of course, but we love football too. It is the most popular sport in this country. So as part of not only the Latino community, but as part of the community of the United States, we also gravitate to the things that are most popular. You know, a lot of times when I'm in a meeting, I suddenly become the Latino expert. Well, I must know everything about soccer, and I must know everything about Latin food and Latin music. I said, well, I do happen to be a soccer fan, but really, I grew up wanting to be shortstop for the New York Yankees. In my household, we love Latin music, salsa, merengue, but we also love rock and roll, right? Depending on your generation. And as far as the programming that we're watching, we love the novelas, the drama of novelas, but we also love Dancing with the Stars and the Flair. So who I am certainly defines me, and part of that is being a Peruvian American, but I probably have much more in common with people of different backgrounds that grew up in northern New Jersey in the suburbs of New York City than I probably do with Peruvians from Peru or Mexicans from Mexico. So that's, again, trying to break through some of those barriers of stereotypes of who we are, and media has to lead the way. Media in the last couple of years has done a better job of looking for new strategies to reach the Latino community, understanding that we're first, while the government likes to put us into one nice box of Hispanics, we first identify by language. English-dominant Latinos, first, second, third generation, as the Pew study has shown, but also from country of origin, whether it's our direct country of origin or where our family comes from. We celebrate our differences while we celebrate the things that we have in common. And media has tuned into that. Univision, Telemundo, of course, the staples in Spanish language media have driven that, but most recently in the last 2 years, Mundo Fox has been introduced into that market. We have the English language market, ABC News and Univision, late last year launching Fusion, a network focused specifically on those first, second, third generation Latinos in English. We had previously NBC Latino, and we still have Fox News Latino, which are these media companies that are focusing on reaching Latinos in their medium of choice, which is driven by mobile and new technology. And then we have, of course, there are the millennials. And the millennials are the ones that everybody's trying to get a hold of. It is a separate group that gravitates from English and Spanish in how they consume news, information, and entertainment. As a first-generation Latino, I grew up watching soccer with my father and my grandfather in Spanish. And there is nothing that an English language network can do unless they have exclusivity to this game that is going to draw me to watch the game in English, because I grew up watching it in Spanish. In the same way I grew up watching baseball, football, NBA in English, and there isn't anything that a Spanish language network is going to do to make me gravitate to watch it in Spanish unless they have exclusivity. So these people gravitate from English to Spanish depending on how their comfort level and the content that they're looking for. I know when I watch Univision and Telemundo, I'm gonna get content that I'm not going to get in ABC, NBC, and CBS. So they launched Mundos is an entertainment network that focuses and projects that experience of the Latinos and how they communicate. CNN Latino, again, another venture that focused in Spanish, but from the point of view of Latinos in this country, and ESPN Deportes, internally also in English, looking to improve on how they best can reach and serve this key demographic. So, the new image of a Latino isn't about comedy, it isn't about crime, it isn't about positions that are of just the service industry. In reality, we are political leaders. We are leading in sports. For me, sports is the ultimate equilibrium. It doesn't matter what language you are. It doesn't matter where you're from. It's all about performance, and performance is how success is defined. And of course, we know of the Pope also being of Latino descent. So who we are is being redefined by the people who are newsmakers. It is our job as a journalist, in our continuing attempt to be fair and accurate, to ensure that we're telling the stories and in many cases advocating for the proper image of Latinos. And even within the Latino community, there is diversity. We are dark-skinned, we are light-skinned, we're brown. We are different ethnicities within our group. So finally, again, I'd like to close with Latinos are redefining what it is to be an American in this country. And we're redefining it not only by our commitment and our contributions locally to our community, but also from where we're from, our countries of origins, our family countries of origins. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Interesting how it has changed until now, right? And we can see it every day. We can see it in Univision, we can see it in Telemundo. Things are changing, are not the same anymore. So let's go to the next panelist. We have Renaud Whitman, Public Programs Director of the Smithsonian Latino Center. Welcome.
Great. Gracias. Buenos días, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Randall Woodeman. I'm the Exhibitions and Public Programs Director at the Smithsonian Latino Center. And that office, the Latino Center, basically tells Latino stories across the nation's museum, which is really 19 museums, pero bueno. Essentially, what I'm going to do here today is recap on some of the ideas that we heard about Latinidad, or Latinhood, if you want to call it that. I'm going to talk about who we are as Latinos to sort of give some more nuance about our linguistic identity, our cultural, ethnic identity, talk about how we fit into U.S. history some, also talk about what some of our historical relationships have been with other communities within the U.S., and if we have time, talk a little bit about Latino audiences here in D.C., especially from the perspective of working at a museum and thinking of Latinos here as our audience. So what we're trying to do is really retell the story of the United States and insert Latinos really back into it, right? Because in many ways, we've always been here, at least with what's called the territorial United States today. And this is important to tell from a multicultural and global perspective, right? So a lot of U.S. history happens outside of the borders of the United States. And this is all stuff that we'll go into as the slides as we move forward. We're going to talk a little bit about what is America, Americans, America, somos todos americanos. I think we're all Americans, I think is a lot of the attitude that a lot of Latin Americans and Latinos come with. We're going to talk a little bit about the terms Hispanic and Latino, especially how we use it in our office or how we understand it. And first, as I was saying, America or the Americas, we're not talking just about the USA, we're talking about a whole hemisphere, right? And a whole hemisphere that's connected by really similar colonial process. So we're going to go back a few centuries to talk about sort of where this all emerges from. So one thing that's important that a lot of us are doing as Latinos in terms of saying, hey, we're part of this country, is reasserting basically Spanish colonial history, right? A lot of people like to point out that St. Augustine, for instance, is the oldest European city in North America. We'll also point to really old cities like Santa Fe, El Paso, Los Angeles. And this is really important because politically it basically says that we're not outsiders, right? There has been a Latino presence in North America for centuries. Now this is slightly problematic to me in a little way. It's kind of funky because I understand what we're trying to say, reassert, the sort of history of our communities here. But does our story really start in 1492, right? What's weird to me about it is that we sort of suddenly are attaching our story to this Spanish story of conquest. And I don't know if that's necessarily where we want to just focus our historical origin. I think it's really important to say, and as we'll talk about later, that Latinos have roots in Africa, Asia, in the indigenous cultures of the Americas. So it's really a question of like, well, where do we start to tell the story? What is our origin point? Who are our ancestors? And really maybe start, I think when we look at history that way, it adds a lot of nuance and richness to what Latinos bring to the United States. So we're going to talk a little bit in these coming slides about who's Hispanic, who's Latino, what does it mean, are these labels interchangeable? And Mark went over this some, but I'll tell you how our office understands it and how definitely I understand it. So for most folks, including myself, Hispanic, Latino, I'm actually half Venegringo, I'm half Venezuelan, half American, raised here in the DC area. So one of the reasons we don't call ourselves the Smithsonian Hispanic Center is because we feel as if Hispanic is really tied to Iberia, right, just to Spain. So to us, it kind of limits the scope, right, makes it a bit more Eurocentric than maybe we'd like it to be, whereas we feel as if the label Latino, and mind you, other people have issues with the label Latino too. Pero en fin, the way we look at Latino is something that's a broader category that acknowledges roots from Africa, Asia. That's really a much more pluralistic identity and it's based. So that's more or less how we function. And also, I want to note that for us, Latino, we throw, it's a big umbrella, and we let the Brazilians in with this one. We're like, you're part of us too, and that's something that the label Hispanic, doesn't make room for. So that's a little bit about how we operate with these labels, and probably some of you, can really relate to this. And now, obviously, labels change over time. We see this frequently, and for a lot of folks, these labels are interchangeable, Hispanic, Latino, whatever. But like Mark was saying, we all are multidimensional people. We function with many labels at the same time. So you can be Latino, Peruvian, Jewish, gay, whatever. All these things can coexist and do in all of us, right? We have many multi-layered identities. So that's an important thing to keep in mind when we're talking about Latinos and who we are, right? So this always comes up on the census. Is Latino a racial category? And no, I mean, it's an ethnic category. I'm not exactly sure what ethnicity means. I mean, I think it's really more of a sort of cultural grouping. But in any case, like I was saying, we use it as something that defines people who have had a common history of colonization by either Spaniards or Portuguese, right? And obviously, we are, probably all of us, pretty multi-ethnic in some way or another, no matter what we look like. So to this point, and I think this is all our lived experiences, I was saying earlier, many Latinos have roots definitely in the Americas with Native peoples, connections to Asia and Africa. And this, you definitely see, as you can probably bear witness to during the Q&A. The breakdown is slightly different depending what countries you're in, but countries like Venezuela, Colombia, Brazil, all of the Caribbean have very large connections to Africa, culturally and ethnically. You also have a lot of places that have really important historical connections to Asia, like Panama, where 10% of the population is Chinese, or Peru, and Brazil, where you have this giant Japanese population. And it's interesting to note that a lot of those same migration flows you saw in the United States. Like, Chinese came to the United States, for instance, to build railroads, source of cheap labor, post-slavery. A lot of those same migrations went to South America as well, and Chinese were building railroads in Peru, for example. Now, I have here, to emphasize that point, we actually have a project at the Smithsonian that looks at Asian and Latino intersections in the United States, and this is the Chinatown Gate in Havana, in Cuba. And I also wanted to mention that I forgot, among the many migrants to Latin America, and of course folks who have later come up here in the United States, you have folks from the Middle East. And a lot of people aren't aware of the large number of Muslims that are in South America and other parts of Latin America. So here's an important issue, and we were talking about linguistic identity earlier, and do all Latinos speak Spanish? And Mark was telling us the sort of nuances that have to do with generations, and obviously if you're here for longer generations, you tend not to, it's harder, to preserve your Spanish, but not all Latinos speak Spanish, and this has to do with things like, say you're from Texas, and somebody like my mom who went to San Antonio and is trying to speak to all these Mexican Americans in Spanish, and they're like, my dominant language is English, and I have to explain to her, well, Mom, guess what? With their experience, when their parents or grandparents were in elementary school, the teachers actually washed their mouths out with soap. So, there really are these things that have happened in other parts of the country, especially the Southwest, that have inhibited the transmission of language to among Latinos. And also, you have to keep in mind that certain folks that come from Latin America, say indigenous migrants, their first language might be Zapotec or some other language, and so Spanish might be a second language to them as well. So just something to keep in mind is that Latinos, although we predominantly speak Spanish and try to maintain Spanish at home, there is a lot of linguistic nuance there. So this is sort of the recap of Latinos in U.S. history, and I'll be real quick. How did this happen? How come 65% of Latinos in the United States are Mexican? Well, Mexican-American War. I might have to do the history lesson later, right? We acquire half of Mexican territory. This all has to do with U.S. expansion, right? We're growing west, take over Mexico. 1898, what happens? United States keeps expanding. We acquire briefly Cuba, Puerto Rico, still some would say a U.S. colony, Hawaii, the Philippines. So again, U.S. history and the history of U.S. expansion is really intimately linked, and if any of you see the film Harvest of Empire, intimately linked to the movements of migrants to the United States. And this all has to do with an old history of the United States, having a lot of connections to Latin America, really starting even in the era of independence, when you have all these Latin Americans coming to Philadelphia to copy the Declaration of Independence and to study the U.S. democratic experience. So I will wrap this up maybe during the Q&A, or if you want to talk to me later, but Latinos don't exist in a bubble. Historically, we have been coexisting with all kinds of other U.S. communities in the Northeast. You know, in New York, we have the legacy of jazz, we have the legacy of hip hop. Also on the West Coast, you want to see a place where Latinos, Mexican Americans come together with other U.S. communities. Think about the farm workers movement and the important connections with Filipino migrant workers as well. So really, I like to say that even though Latinos have a very historical sense of identity, in many ways we really overlap with the histories of a lot of other peoples. So, in any case, we are highly connected, and I think there's a lot of, when people look at Latinos, I think a lot of times it's easy to sort of look at them as a bubble, but in fact, I think we're a core part of the United States experience and a lot of part of the United States regional experiences. So I will wrap it up there, and I think we're ready to move on to the Q&A.
Let's give him an applause. Well, definitely we are part of this country, and that's the reason why we're here, to connect with everybody, and that's what we're going to do right now. We're going to ask some questions. You have to come to the microphone. We're just going to have 3 questions because of the time. So if you're going to start, go ahead, please.
Yes. Thank you very much for an excellent presentation. My question, I'm glad 2 people can address the question I'm going to ask regarding the census. In 2012, there was an increase of about 1 million households in the country, of which Hispanics accounted for 983,000. That's about 98% of the net growth. Last year, in 2013, there was only an increase of 205,000 Hispanic households, a difference of about 800,000. Do you know what the difference is accounted by?
Mark, I'll let you take that.
I don't know what the difference is accounted by. My guess is it has lots to do with the way in which the population estimates are done from the Census Bureau. And it's important to note that from year to year, these estimates do bounce around, and there are errors associated with it. So one has to keep in mind that it's not just 900,000 Hispanic households created in 2012, but that's plus or minus, and I don't know what the range is, but there will be some range to that. As a result, sometimes these numbers bounce around. If you take a look at the Salvadoran Cuban chart that I presented, you'll see that those numbers, they jostle back and forth. There isn't a really nice smooth trend. It actually goes back and forth. But it's important to note that they are estimates. And so I don't know exactly why. I'd have to do a little bit of investigation and call up some folks at the Census Bureau to see what may have happened. But it's likely because of the ways in which the estimates are done. I don't think there was this huge surge and then there was this real slowdown. I think you probably have to average the two to get some sense of what's happening over this period. And I might even do more like a 5-year or an 8-year average as opposed to 1 year at a time. That's one of the challenges with the population estimates. We all want to know how many Latinos there are and how big these populations are, but it's important to note that on an annual, year-by-year basis, they are just estimates and they have some error associated with them. Yeah, that's a big number. I agree with you that it's a big number, and I don't know why the difference. It strikes me that that's really an uneven up and then down. I'd have to look into it. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Let's go for the next questions.
Hi, I'm Michelle Chavez, and my question is directed to Hugh Abelta. So as an aspiring journalist, I often wonder how I can bring diversity into the newsroom. And often I wonder, whether American news stations or news networks, whether they only look at, Latinos as someone who can bring diversity physically or based on their country of origin. I would like to know to what extent does that exist, and whether some news organizations will look more into deep level diversity based on, maybe my personal experiences as opposed to my country of origin.
Excellent question. The first thing is to say the National Association of Hispanic Journalists exists in order to achieve part of what you just said. Part of our mission is to work with media companies in order to help them achieve their goals. And by helping them achieve their goals, we're also achieving our goals. And what is that goal? That goal is to improve on better serving the viewers, the readers, the listeners, not just Latinos, but all listeners. And media needs to be a reflection of who they're serving. And that's going to change locally depending on whether you're in the DC area or New York City or Los Angeles. You need to reflect who that community is. And part of that is not just about having reporters in front of the camera or telling the stories. It's also about ensuring that the people behind the cameras, the editorial decision makers, are reflective of that community. So what you can do is what you're doing now. You're a student, you're studying journalism. Get involved in whether it's NHJ or other associations in order to help tell your story. You have a unique story of who you are based on where you were born, how old you are, where your family's from. That experience is enriching in a larger conversation editorially, but also your point of view. As a journalist, we're taught to be balanced, but more than anything, we need to be fair and accurate. And so the example that I give is, while I am a champion of women's issues, I have an interest in African American culture, I will never be an African American, and I will never be a woman. And so for me to be a newsroom leader and decide what the content should be, focus on these two communities, is preposterous. Now, in a larger conversation editorially with those two groups represented and others, and having a conversation, we'll get to the center of a story that is focused on that particular community, but also universal. So as far as stereotypes in media rooms, media companies know they've got to do a better job in being inclusive of the Latino community, both in behind the cameras and in front of the cameras, because if not, from a very selfish standpoint, they will cease to be relevant in key markets where it is in their best interest to continue to grow. So from a standpoint of growing their business, it is good business for them to invest in diversity, and NHJ is helping them in meeting those goals through recruiting, through training, and helping them better understand, as we're doing today, who this community is and how they're represented.
Gracias. Perfect. Let's go for the next question, and this is the last question. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Carla Silvestre now with Montgomery College. And thank you. I always enjoy listening to everything you all have to say. Census question. The 2010 census was critical, I feel, for the Latino community in Montgomery County, and many of the people that are here were a part of making that happen. Can you tell me a little bit about the Latino participation rate in Montgomery County in the 2010 census? And I also understand that Montgomery County and DC were recently selected as the only jurisdictions in the country to pilot the 2020 census. If you could tell us a little bit about both participation rates and also what that means for Montgomery County with this new pilot.
Oh, so you know about the 2020 census test. Well, I will be honest, I didn't come prepared with participation rates for the Hispanic community in particular during the 2010 census. I know that the participation rate was roughly the same that it was in 2000, during the 2000 census, which is, because my memory isn't completely accurate, is somewhere between 65 and 68%. However, because the county grew so much more between the 2000 and 2010 census, not just the Hispanic population, but the community as a whole, you're well over 1 million now. That was considered quite a triumph because of that growth. To even really, you're not really just towing the line when you have had that significant amount of growth of people. The 2020 census, you know, I'm not privy to why these areas were selected. We are, you know, not far from census headquarters in Suitland. That may be one of the reasons, and one of the goals, you know, of the census test is to test certain different ways of collecting data to try to really streamline and improve that process when we go live in 2020.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful, wasn't it? Yes. Did you guys enjoy? So let's give it an applause. And now we're going to have an artist. She is Maritza Rivera, and she is a poet, right?
Poeta.
Es poeta de Mariposa Poetry, and she's going to give us some of her poetries in Spanish and in English, right? Perfect.
Identity is through